Okay, good morning Year 10. This is actually the second exercise in this chapter. I did leave it out, I'm coming back to it now, because I'd rather just teach how to deal with quadratic equations by solving them by factorising, and if it doesn't factorise, by the quadratic formula. Some boys, when you get used to this, some of you might decide, oh, I don't think I want to use the quadratic formula, I think I'd like to do it with completing the square. That's perfectly fine if you want to do that. That's not my preference, but if you want to do that and you understand it really well, that's great. But there are some times where you have no option but to follow this method. So some questions will say, by completing the square, solve this equation. So everybody needs to know it in case those words come up in a question. Further down the track, you are going to need to know how completing the square works when you do more equations and graphs on the parabola and the circle. Okay, it's used on the circles to find the centre and the radius of circles that have got different centres. It's also used for parabolas in the Year 12 course. So that will help you be finding the vertex and something else which I'm not going to go into now because you don't know what it is. Alright, but those sorts of questions are going to be important later for you. Circles we'll probably do later this year. The parabolas will come more into Year 12 work. Okay, so the way this process works. This first question here says solve by completing the square. So if you look at this question and go, well, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to go and use the quadratic formula, you'll get no marks because they've given you an instruction to do it by completing the square. Alright, so it has to be done that way. It also gives you an idea that your answer is going to be an exact form. Now remember, exact form means you're going to end up with the square root somewhere in your answer. And that's what the quadratic formula does. We often end up with square roots in our answer there. But we're doing this one with completing the square. So there are different ways that people teach this. The way I teach it is always to take the number over to the other side. So that -5 is going to the other side. Now we would never do that normally because with quadratic equations I'm constantly saying, is it equal to 0? Make sure it's equal to 0 and then we can start. And that happens for everything to do with parabolas. However, for completing the square we need to get that number to the other side. When it's over there it gets it out of the way for what we're about to do. Okay, now this next step, we're going to look at what we have on the left-hand side. We've got h squared plus 2h. So what we're trying to do is get a square, so a bracket that's squared, and something in the bracket that when it's expanded will give me an h squared plus 2h. So I need an h here because h squared will give me that h squared there. So that's fine. The difficult bit is this part. The easy thing for you to know is you just take that number and halve it. Okay, so if you take that and halve it, keep the sign with it. So this is a plus, I'm going to keep the plus and halve the 2, we get a 1. That's the easy way of doing it. Alright, so I'll talk a bit more about why it's that in a minute. So we're going to put that in and just put the squared there. Now I want that written in red pen. If you try and think that this is part of your working, it makes things a little bit more complicated later. Okay, so please write that in red pen. It's not a line of the working as such, there's no equals here, you've got nothing with the 5 over here, nothing. We're just trying to get this bracket. Now once you've done that, I am going to continue the working, so just keep that equal sign lined up with that one up there. And what I'm going to do is expand this bracket. Now, some of you may have forgotten this, but when you're expanding the bracket, write this down so you don't forget. I think most of you have forgotten. We get the first term and we square it. So we square the first term. So h squared is h squared, and write it down. The next thing we do is what you'll probably have forgotten. We're going to get the product of the 2 terms and then double it. So we're doubling, in other words, timesing by 2. the product of the two terms. So, if you look at the two terms, we have h and positive 1. If you multiply them, you get positive 1h. Double it means just doubling the number part. So positive 1h, double the 1, is positive 2h. And that's what we write down next. And the third thing you're going to write down is squaring the last term. The last term is positive 1. Square it and you get positive 1. Write it down. Now, after you've expanded this red bracket here and you've got h squared plus 2h plus 1, then the equals is lined up, you need to look back at that last line we had and see how it changed. On the left-hand side, h squared plus 2h suddenly became h squared plus 2h plus 1. So there's a plus 1 here. So because we want to keep our two sides balanced, we have to put a plus 1 on the right-hand side as well. So both of them are going to have a plus 1 on them. So in the following line, we're just going to work out 5 plus 1, that gives you 6. And over here, we're going to take this back to be the bracket we just expanded. So it's now going to be written not like that, but as h plus 1 squared. So now what we're doing is solving this little equation. So we're not going to expand this bracket because we'll end up getting back to where we started. We're not doing that. So we're going to get rid of the squared by doing the opposite of squaring, which is square root. Don't forget that when you've got a squared there, you're going to end up with two solutions, plus and minus. So make sure you write the plus and minus here. Then in the next line, we're just going to take this plus 1 and move it over to there to be minus 1. You could write it on the end, it'd still be fine. I'm writing it in here because that's what the quadratic formula answer would have looked like. But you don't have to. If you write plus or minus root 6 minus 1, that's fine. And that's the end of the question. So that's all you do. So we're going to go through two more. So first thing we do is to move this number over to the other side. So I'm sure you'll all be able to do that part. So it's w squared minus 4w equals 60. When you move it to the other side, it changes its sign. All right, then the next part is we're going to try and get our bracket in red. So we're going to write w because w squared will give us the w squared. Then remember I said to you we halve this number. So half of minus 4 is minus 2. Okay, you will know if you've done it right in the next line or not. So the next line we're going back to our blue or black pen, put the equal sign down. Now we're expanding that red bracket. So we're going to follow through these steps here. The first step says square the first term. So the w squared is w squared. The next part, don't muck it up. Double the product of the two terms. So let's get the product of the two terms and then double the answer. So here's our two terms, w and minus 2. Multiply them, get your product. That's minus 2w. Now double the number, minus 4w. Now at that point, you'll know if you did the right thing, because if it doesn't look like that, there's something wrong. Okay, and the last bit says square the last term. So here's our last term, minus 2. Square it, now be careful, squaring a negative gives you a positive 4. Okay, so now we're going to look at the last line we had in this line and see how it changed. Well, you can see we've got a plus 4 tagged on the end there, and we have to do the same over here. We're going to put a plus 4 on that to keep the two sides balanced. Okay, so do 60 plus 4 is 64. And over here, we're just taking all of this back to the bracket. Okay, now we're solving it. Do not go and expand it because we're not going back to where we started. So we want to get rid of the squared. So the opposite of squaring is square root. The squared's gone from here, but don't forget the squared means we've got two solutions. One is positive and one is negative. Okay, so then all you have to do is move that -2 to the other side so we get our W on its own. That will become a +2. Copy this down. Now on this one, it says leave your answers in exact form. I've taken this straight from the book which had this instruction. I don't know why you would be leaving root 64 as root 64. So I'm going to go further because I don't think that instruction is right for that question. So let's just keep going. Root 64 is 8. Split these two up. And let's work out what they are. 2 minus 8 is -6. And 2 plus 8 is 10. Our two answers are W equals -6 and 10. So really, when you look back at the beginning, that would have factorised. We can tell by looking at these answers, those brackets up there, if we factorised, would have been W plus 6, W minus 10 equals 0, and you would have got that out straight away. But we're following the process because they asked for the process to be used. Okay, let's try the next one. We're moving our number to the other side. So just move that across. Make sure you change the sign. All right, next step. Now this one's a bit trickier. This question is harder. So just write down hard for this because it does involve a bit of a trick here. So we have to just make sure this is going to be a nightmare if we try and do completing the square with a 2 still in front of the G squared. So if you have a number here, we're going to get rid of that right now. So we're going to divide every term by 2. If we do that, it looks like this. Alright, so now if we just simplify it down, these are going to be gone, so that we've just got a G squared. Now I'm going to just write this as 7 over 2G. It just makes it easier to do the brackets when I get to it. Equals 3 over 2. Okay, so now we're up to the bracket part. So get your red pen out. This has to be something squared in here. So we've got a G squared, so this first thing's going to be G to get G squared. And remember I said we're going to halve this number. Now that's probably not that easy to do, so get your calculator out. I might just turn that around so you can see the rest of the board. Alright, so if we get 7 over 2 and divide by 2 on your calculator, 7 over 2 divided by 2 on your calculator should give you 7 over 4. So we're going to write in here a plus for the plus there, 7 over 4. Because remember, we're halving our number to get what goes in there. So the 7 over 2 has to be halved, has to be divided by 2. If you want to write times a half instead of divided by 2, that's fine. Alright, so now we're going to, sorry, I'll just write that in red so we stay with what we're doing. Okay, just come down here with your equal sign. So now we're expanding our brackets. Square the first term is G squared. Do the product of the two terms, plus 7 over 4G. Double it, use your calculator, 7 over 4 times 2 is plus 7 over 2G. Remember, it's going to end up being that, so you can cheat if you like. Then we're going to square the last term. 7 over 4 squared. Use your calculator, or you can square the top and square the bottom. 7 squared is 49. 4 squared is 16. I'm pretty sure that's what the calculator will give you if you type it in as 7 over 4 squared like that. It will give you the 49 over 16. Okay, and we've got 3 over 2 over here on the side. Now, we look at this last line and look at this line. Suddenly we've got a plus 49 over 16 here. So we have to add that over on the other side. I'm just getting rid of this so I've got room. So now all of this goes back to the bracket. Sorry, I'm just fixing something up here. All right, so the next thing we need to do is get your calculator out and just type in what's on the right-hand side there, which is 3 over 2 plus 49 over 16. And it gives you 73 over 16, and write that down. Okay, I'm running out of room here, so on the next video I'm going to finish this question off and do some more questions.